Final Fantasy VII Remake is finally here. It's been 5 years of waiting since its initial reveal at E3 2015, and an additional 10 years of speculation about its existence prior to that, starting with the PlayStation 3 tech demo acting as the catalyst. But it's finally in our hands, and after a decade and a half, does it live up to the monolithic expectations placed upon it? Well, I've played it, and I've finished it, and I have my thoughts. Now, this is going to be a spoiler-free review, so I won't be getting into story-related specifics, at least not stuff that's in the late game. So if you haven't played it yet, or simply haven't finished, and would like to remain unspoiled, you're free to listen on. Now, as you may know, Remake is not the entirety of the original story. It's the first episode in a series, and this opening act covers only the Midgar portion, which, as you may recall if you played the original game, was only about 5 to 6 hours long. It's a ballsy move on Square Enix's part to take that small chunk of narrative and try to expand it into a 30-plus hour game that offers as much content as a full Final Fantasy experience, especially when it comes to world building. However, I think the game pulls it off really, really well. Midgar simply feels alive in Remake in a way that the original game was sadly unable to capture, probably due to technological limitations at the time. And that's thanks to so many new and greatly expanded areas that were either completely absent or just implied before. Now, some locations, either the slums or various dungeons that used to be only 1 or 2 screens in the original game, are now fully realized areas that offer hours of content, and they look beautiful. Even the slums are gorgeous, despite essentially being large heaps of trash that people happen to live in. It's immaculate and beautiful garbage, and an unprecedented amount of care was put into ensuring all of this impressive detail. Now, with a new and expanded world also comes new characters, and there are some big additions to the supporting cast, such as Chocobo Sam, Madame M, Andrea Rodea, Marl, the landlady, and more, whose presence contribute a lot to what makes the poverty-stricken world of Midgar feel alive and inhabited. Not all characters are so clear-cut good. Some are hit or miss depending on your tastes. For example, I personally like the new character Roche, the speed demon soldier who's shown up in trailers before, but some might consider him to be a huge dweeb who just feels like a temporary antagonist in a filler arc for a shonen anime, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that, but I still like him anyway. And then you have Chadley, a young boy who creates and sells new materia. Now, this guy stands out in particular simply because he looks like he belongs in a different game. Now, additionally, there are characters who might not have been in the original Final Fantasy VII, but still appeared beforehand in related media, and have finally been given a physical presence in a game for the first time, such as Leslie, who is one of Don Corneo's employees, and Kyrie, a mischievous slum inhabitant, who were both present in the novel The Kids Are Alright. Finally, with the enlargement of the size and detail of Midgar, comes some minigames to also keep you busy on occasion, including darts, squats, pull-ups, and dancing. Unfortunately, while these little momentary distractions are nice novelties, they're sadly not much more than just that, fleeting novelties. Which is a shame, because I really would have liked the opportunity to play darts against Tifa and Barrett instead of a leaderboard that's just pinned to the wall. I also would have really enjoyed varying levels of difficulty for the dance minigame, as I actually quite enjoy rhythm games. And speaking of Tifa and Barrett, another massive expansion to the world of Final Fantasy VII is characters. One of my absolute biggest worries about this remake was that the characterization of the main cast would be underwhelming, despite them being the faces of this popular legendary tale. And I'm glad to say that my fears were not only avoided, but the amount of personality and depth that are given to our heroes in what is only supposed to be about 20% of the full story is huge. Almost every time they interact with one another is fantastic. I loved listening and watching Cloud talk to Tifa, Barrett, Aerith, and interacting with the world around them. With the expansion of Midgar came many more opportunities for their personalities to shine and distinguish themselves. And that's what I care about the most when it comes to games like this, characters having enjoyable personalities. Now, sometimes they might ham it up a bit for comedic effect, such as Barrett, for example. He does it fairly often, but it never reached the point where I found it annoying or grating in any way. I just found it endearing and fun. A huge contributor to how great our characters are is the voice acting, and to put it simply, everyone knocks it out of the park. And I'm not just talking about the main cast either. Even supporting characters and nameless NPCs who only give ambient dialogue sound amazing. And that's another thing too, the amount of voices in the game. There's not a single line of unvoiced dialogue that I was able to find. The ambient chatter that I just mentioned is audible by simply walking past people wandering around the slums. And they offer anywhere from random musings to comments on things that you've done, or subtle hints about the story itself. I guess if there's one person who probably seemed to get some criticism for their part, it's Tyler Hoechlin for his role as Sephiroth. I've seen quite a few people say that they preferred George Newbern, but honestly, I'm digging Hoechlin's portrayal a little bit more. And that's not to say that Newbern wasn't a good Sephiroth, but I feel like his voice was probably a little too cool and suave. Hoechlin's delivery has a bit more of that tinge of madness and instability and detachment that Sephiroth carries around with him every time he shows up. Now, one of the major features of the original game was the affinity system, where you basically scored affection points with your teammates depending on how you interacted with them. And this system makes a return in Remake, as any decision that you make throughout the game could affect certain scenes that you watch later on. And that's just something worth keeping in mind. And I'm glad it's back, and it makes certain choices really rewarding. Graphically, the game in general is beautiful, especially the character models of our main and supporting cast. They look absolutely gorgeous in cutscenes, arguably even better than they look in the pre-rendered movies that play in various parts of the story. It's really incredible how attractive everyone looks in this game, and I'm not just talking about Cloud and the women. Barrett is really handsome, Biggs is beautiful, and even Wedge is a fat guy attractive. You know, he looks well put together. Unfortunately, not everything is so smooth on the graphical side of things. There are some texture issues that are pretty common, especially in the slums. One of the biggest culprits that people like to make fun of is the texture on the door of Cloud and Tifa's apartments. It seriously looks like a muddy, blurry texture from an early PlayStation 2 game. I feel like these texture mishaps might be a bug, but we'll have to wait and see how they're addressed. There's also lighting, which is similarly fantastic. Scenes that take place during the night are really moody and atmospheric and pleasant. Certain shots in Mako reactors with their vibrant blue luminescence and high-tech metal environments look astounding. The UI and menus are very clear, clean, and easily legible. I really love good UI and menu design, especially when the color scheme is so blue-centric. It's my favorite color. However, there is one gripe that I have about the menu navigation and design, and it's the weapon upgrade screen. There's a rather annoying lack of information on your own stats, despite having many options to choose from when improving your weapon. It would be nice if they placed a stat table on the side of the screen. I also wouldn't mind if they simplified the visuals of the upgrades too, because even though the whole crystal motif is nice to look at, it's kind of bothersome watching the opening and closing animation play every time you access it. And now we're finally going to get into the meat of this review, the gameplay. Now first, it's content, specifically dungeons and side quests. Now for the most part, dungeons are pretty straightforward. Some are a bit too linear for their own good, however, being rather hallway-like in layout and design. Some areas are more complex, but there are a few spots you basically progress in one flat direction. If I had to place Remake's linearity somewhere within the Final Fantasy franchise, I'd say it's not as bad as 13, but not as open as 10. Now 10 was linear, Of course, it was the most linear Final Fantasy game the time that it came out, but it had the bonus of allowing you to visit previous locations to do things that you couldn't do before, like a lot of Final Fantasy games before it. Unfortunately, dungeons in Remake are one and done, and most cannot be accessed again without the chapter select function that you unlock after you beat the game once. With that in mind, there are very few dungeons that I flat out dislike. Like, the only ones that come to mind as particularly weak was revisiting the sewers in the later half of the game, which was the only part of the entire experience that felt like real padding. It could have been a cutscene and still provide just as much entertainment for the player, to be honest. Outside of that, some dungeons commit the only crime of just being pretty long and starting to drag near the end, such as Chapter 5 when you're going around catwalks and scaffolding underneath the upper plate to shut off the lights, and Chapter 17 where you're going around Shinra Labs for what feels like hours. Side quests in general are mostly fine, though some are pretty fetch questy. Go here and kill this monster, or go here and retrieve this thing. There aren't that many that offer a new side of the gameplay or story that are fun to go back to. Now, combat is another spot where Remake really shines. It's quick, fluid, open-ended, and reliable. When I hit a button or select an ability, I do it as quickly as I expect, and that's great. The main characters also play very differently from one another, offering layers to the combat experience depending on who you play as and when, and all of them are very enjoyable to control in their own right. Cloud is an all-around fun combatant, but I think Tifa might be the most entertaining of all. Her blazing fast movement and capabilities for oppressive offense make her a sight to behold. Barret and Aerith do an excellent job as ranged fighters, with one acting as an offense-heavy tank and the other working as a mage. There's something here for everyone. Combat, as fantastic as it is, isn't totally perfect. I have a couple of minor complaints, and one fairly big one. First, the minor ones. I'm not a huge fan of the lack of invincibility frames on dodges. I really enjoy action games, and iframes on evasive maneuvers are generally a must in them. And since there are none in Remake, it basically turns the dodge into less of a real dodge and more of a mobility option when you need a small but fast burst of distance. Best to only be used when you're already running out of the way of an attack or something. You can still dodge somewhat reliably, especially with Cloud and Tifa, but it's not a sure thing, even if you think your timing is good. But it's not a consistent major issue, it's just a very minor nitpicky annoyance that rears its ugly head every once in a while. Now, my second issue is the camera, which likes to act up and get stuck in odd places, pointing away from the action when you fight in rooms, sometimes forcing you to stop locking on to an enemy so you can reposition yourself and find out where the hell you are. Now, granted, this is a common problem in a lot of action games. A perfect camera is hard as shit to make. Now, my big complaint about gameplay is air combat, and to be frank, it is absolutely pathetic. Fighting airborne enemies in this game as Cloud or Tifa is just a chore. You stand below them, press attack, and your character automatically jumps to hit them with a measly 3 or 4 hit combo, but they have no real movement when they're up there, and the enemy very easily escapes your reach, and you have to repeat the process, or just give up entirely and move to spamming magic. Fighting in the air is just bad in Remake, and I groan every time a flyer shows up when I'm controlling Cloud or Tifa and have neither Barret or Aerith in my party to help out. Now, a neat thing about gameplay is the unlockable hard mode that you acquire after beating the game once. Now, this special difficulty does a lot of things aside from just beefing up your foes. It disables items completely. They can't be used either inside or outside of battle. And rest benches now only restore HP, meaning that MP is significantly more precious than ever, and the only way to get it back is by breaking boxes or regenerating it slowly in combat. You'll also be rewarded with manuscripts that give you points to further upgrade your weapons as you clear hard mode, mission by mission, chapter by chapter. It's a great challenge for those who love the combat enough to want to up the ante and get into some real shit. You'll enjoy it, at least until you reach that eventual fight that'll make you want to pull your hair out, but hey, you have to expect that kind of stuff in hard mode, right? It's no question that Remake was made with lots of money. By simply going through the game, you can feel the cash in the combat and see it in the character models. It's almost more than a AAA experience. It's practically quadruple A. Now, quality of life features are no different. This game has a ton of them. The most useful one that I wish every single game with side quests had was the option to instantly fast travel back to your quest giver after you fulfill your objectives. I can't even begin to tell you how many games I've played where I wished I could do that. A very tiny thing that some people will appreciate an unmeasurable amount is the fact that the playtime counter will freeze after about 2 minutes of inactivity. Now, people enjoy knowing how long they've been playing a game, and usually those people also hate having their playtimes inflated because the game doesn't know how to stop counting when they're idle. And this tiny function would be a godsend to them. Other neat features include pressing R1 in the materia menu to bring up everyone's materia loadout simultaneously, and holding L1 when using an item to keep the command menu open so you can keep giving the same item to the same person. A lot of thought went into making the game as smooth of an experience as possible. One of the most famous aspects of the Final Fantasy franchise is its music. Even the games that have received less favorable opinions from the fans than others still have a fantastic soundtrack to back it up, and this is yet another category that Remake unashamedly excels in. Now, I won't get into too many specifics here because, one, some track titles could be considered spoilers in themselves, and two, with over 150 tracks in its massive score, if I were to go into specifics about the music, I would be here all day. Just know that many famous Final Fantasy tracks make a return with new and improved arrangements, and it's undeniably impressive that Square found a way to breathe new life into 23-year-old compositions as well as they did with the game itself and the world that it's set in. Now finally, we have the story. Now, as this is a spoiler-free review, I obviously won't go into detail here, but there are some things worth talking about, and I'll try to do it as carefully as I can. The plot of Remake is very investing, due in no small part to the amazing characters and fleshed-out world that I mentioned before, but also thanks to new details that were left unknown in the original game. Now that being said, there are some steps taken here that could aggravate both people who love the original and people who never played it at all. Now, in the latter's case, Remake makes the dangerous and potentially annoying assumption that you played the original game, and this fact will lead to confusion and disconnects with people experiencing the story for the first time through this game. If you never touched Final Fantasy VII, a lot of head-scratching awaits you when you complete this game, and you'll either need to play the original or wait anywhere from 2 to 4 years for Part 2 to come out. And even then, I still recommend you play the original, if only to know the full context before committing to resuming the Remake series. Now, Final Fantasy VII Remake is an astounding game. It's insanely fun, it's beautiful to look at and listen to, the characters are great, the world is extremely interesting, and the plot is investing, if also a bit confusing for new people. It's not perfect, but considering the ridiculously high expectations placed upon it, I'd say Square did an amazing job. It's already a frontrunner in my personal race for Game of the Year, and to say I look forward to Part 2 would be an understatement. I am damn near foaming at the mouth for it. Now, before I end this review, I also want to comment on the Deluxe Edition, which is the version that I bought, and it is probably one of the best Deluxe editions of a game that I've ever gotten. The soundtrack CD is great, the hardcover art book is great, the steelbook case is gorgeous, and it all comes in a very, very nice matte box with the embossed logo on it. I love it. It's amazing. Anyway, this concludes my review, my spoiler-free review. Thank you for watching. I want to do a spoiler discussion video where I talk about the ending at length, but I don't know if I'll commit to it just yet. I definitely have a ton of thoughts about it though, and if I do end up doing that spoiler discussion video, you'll see it. So, thanks for watching.